Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon the time of day for you. Thank you for taking the time to spend a few minutes with me. I hope you find the experience entertaining as well as educational. Before I begin, let me tell you a little about myself. Now, when I give speeches, this part is usually done by another person who's introducing me. So you'll pardon me if this sounds a bit pretentious, but my advisors have told me this is what I should say. My name is John Fall. I'm a speaker, seminar workshop facilitator, and senior global executive management leadership consultant. I have over 4 decades of experience with organizations ranging in size from a few hundred employees to hundreds of thousands worldwide. My clients include Honda, Toyota, General Motors, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, Royal Dutch Shell, Australian Teleservices Association, IBM, Lockheed Martin, ESI International, Computer Task Group, and numerous small and mid-sized enterprises. My industry experience is extensive. It includes automotive, financial services, oil and gas, healthcare, employee benefits, mortgage banking, manufacturing, distribution, construction, real estate, insurance, and others. My consulting engagements, which were predominantly initiated by client referrals, have taken me throughout North America and Asia Pacific, including Australia, Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, and they've involved vendor negotiations, management of client employees, consultants, and offshore resources. I'm a certified project management professional, former director of the Orange County, California, U.S. chapter of the Independent Computer Consultants Association, and author of Using Information as a Resource, published in Mortgage Banking Magazine, and Living with a Fast Idiot, the Executive's Guide to Computers, used by Arthur Andersen and Company's introductory course on computers. I created and conducted a seminar workshop, How to Select and Install Information Technology, a Management Perspective, for the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans Automation Institute in Palm Springs, California in the U.S., and a workshop entitled How to Implement an E-Strategy for the Australian Teleservices Association in Sydney, Australia. It delivered real-life strategies and the pitfalls of e-strategy implementation for this organization whose members are contact center managers and team members. The workshop included web integration techniques and department organization strategies. I also developed and addressed a speech to high school students titled, What's Your Dream? At the De La Salle College of St. Benilde's Choose IT, Discover and Learn Your Future conference in Manila in the Philippines. I'm listed in Who's Who in the World, Who's Who in America, Who's Who in Finance and Industry, Who's Who in Finance and Business, Who's Who in Emerging Leaders in America, and Who's Who in the West. This speech is part of what I call Fall's Inspirational Kickoff Speeches, a collection of 5 short inspirational speeches designed to kick off an annual planning meeting, team building event, corporate reorganization introduction, or any meeting that could use a refreshing start. This speech is called Do You Know Who You Are? The other speeches in the collection are The Mirror Test, It's Not About You, You Don't Have to Be Famous, and It's Never Too Late. Do you know who you are? I don't mean your name, unless you're in one of the stages of Alzheimer's or had a little too much to drink before you came here today. You can probably remember that. And I don't mean for the answer to be the same as a philosopher or playwright might come up with, like Descartes' I think, therefore I am, or Shakespeare's to be or not to be, that is the question, and similar expressions. And I also don't mean for the answer to be the same as if a psychiatrist or psychologist had asked you, where the answer is often husband or wife, father or mother, son or daughter. I mean from a business perspective, from a career perspective. Do you know who you are? Not just your title, whether it's chef, concert pianist, custodial engineer, customer service representative, manager, director, vice president, or even CEO. But do you know who you think you are? How you project yourself? How you think others see you and how they really see you? If you're not able to answer these critical questions, you probably not only don't know who you are, but you are also most likely not where you thought you'd be in your career by now. Because if you don't know who you are, others, especially your managers who can promote you to a better position, are probably wondering the same thing. Who are you? What's next for you? Let me tell you a little about who I am and who I've been. Later, I'll tell you a story about an executive who forgot who he was, but was lucky enough to be reminded in time for him to put back the pieces of his faltering career. That story is called You Forgot Who You Are, and it's from my latest book, And Then There Were Stories, Lessons from a Lifetime of Leadership. The book is available on Amazon.com in both print and electronic Kindle versions. I started my career decades ago, right out of college, as a technical systems engineer working for IBM. I worked there for a while and then left to become a technical consultant working with development engineers. Later, I worked still technical with small to medium-sized enterprises developing and supporting their business IT applications. I know enough about myself, partially because I worked with other people who were really talented technically, to know that I was never going to invent anything like what Bill Gates did at Microsoft or Steve Jobs did at Apple. But I enjoyed the work for a long time and made a good living out of it. But as I grew older, I more and more had that gnawing feeling many of us get when we know we're missing something. I was still fairly happy with my technical work, but I'd begun several forays into management, first as a technical leader and then as a project manager for technical development, which made me yearn for more leadership. I was always an avid reader, so to learn more during my transition into management and leadership, I changed my reading choices away from technical books and towards books on management and leadership. But what really helped propel me in my career was that I had the good fortune to work with some outstanding leaders, men and women who I respected and who respected me. So I was able to learn a lot about leadership from them. One of the suggestions they gave me was to develop some seminars. They said that everyone enjoyed my stories, which I've used most of my life to get across ideas to people, and that I should think about giving some seminars. I thought that was a great idea and had the chance to create and conduct a seminar workshop, How to Select and Install Information Technology, a Management Perspective, for the International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans Automation Institute in Palm Springs, California in the U.S. That seminar, in addition to the fulfillment it gave me, also brought some new business helping organizations select and install information technology. And it helped to strengthen my decision to move away from technical consulting. Shortly afterwards, in the late 1990s, I took advantage of the turbulence in information technology because of the year 2000 crisis, sometimes referred to as Y2K, because K is a symbol used by computer people to mean approximately 1000. And I decided to complete my redefinition of who I was from technical to leadership. I decided to also change the nature of my business away from small to medium-sized enterprises and focus instead on large global corporations. I found the largest year 2000 Y2K engagement I could find in the US with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company headquartered in Akron, Ohio. It was a huge contract, over 130 million US dollars, and I ran a major portion of it that included the largest plants throughout the United States. I followed this with a contract in Melbourne and Sydney, Australia that included a seminar I developed and presented titled How to Implement an E-Strategy that delivered real-life strategies and the pitfalls of E-strategy implementation for this organization whose members are contact center managers and team members. The seminar included web integration techniques and department organization strategies. I then had the good fortune to work with General Motors, mentoring their project managers in Singapore and Tokyo, Japan, as well as Detroit, Michigan in the US. I followed this with management of IT projects for Toyota Financial Systems in Torrance, California in the US, then Royal Dutch Shell in Houston, Texas, and American Honda Motor Company also in Torrance in the US. I was ready, I thought, to semi-retire, so with my wife, designed and built a vacation house in Tagaytay in the Philippines. It has since turned out to be more of a permanent and delightful place to live. I started to write a book and then returned to the US for a while to help a client recover a mission-critical information technology project. After that brief hiatus, I finished writing and published the book and decided to continue my speaking and seminar leadership consulting. That's why I'm here today telling you stories. Well, that's who I've been, who I am now, and an abbreviated version of how I got to where I am now. I hope the stories help you as you take a hard look at your own career and how you intend to move forward. Here are some ideas for you that might help. First, write down who you think you are and make it in the form of what we consultants often call an elevator speech. That's a soundbite about who you are that you can give to someone in a short ride in an elevator. We consultants use it hoping to find some new business. You can use it to get recognized in your own organization, and it will certainly come in handy if you're looking around for a position in a new organization. Second, ask your colleagues to verify what you've written. You might be surprised to find out you project yourself to be very different from who you think you are. Third, now, write down who you want to be next. And finally, also write down a plan and timetable to become this next you. Now, before I finish, here's the story I promised you earlier. It's a story about one of my favorite clients, Ed. The story is titled You Forgot Who You Are, and it's taken from my book, and then there were stories, Lessons from a Lifetime of Leadership, available on Amazon.com in print and electronic Kindle editions. Ed drove a huge Cadillac Eldorado convertible with a set of longhorns as a hood ornament and a horn that played "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You" when he blew it. Instead of a coffee table in his office, he had a roulette wheel covered with glass, and he'd take off the glass and challenge his visitors to gamble with him, and he'd almost always win. He was short by U.S. standards, not quite 5 feet tall, about 1.5 meters, but he was one of those people that are truly larger than life. When I met Ed, he'd just moved to Southern California from Houston, Texas in the U.S. I was consulting for a mortgage company. It was in the mid-1980s in the U.S., and the industry was in trouble. Interest rates were shooting through the roof, and home values were plummeting throughout the country. The problem was to be repeated decades later, only in far greater proportions, and lead to a worldwide recession. Needless to say, it was difficult for them to get new business. In addition, large retail organizations had just started to offer mortgages through their retail outlets, and the small company I was working with was afraid that if they didn't do something soon, they'd be unable to continue in business. They looked into a variety of options and, in the end, decided it was best to acquire a real estate franchise which would provide them an automatic source of new customers. It was at the time that the real estate franchise business was just starting to boom, so they felt they were getting in on the ground floor of something. Unfortunately, they were in too much of a hurry, and the company they bought contained a host of problems, including the president who'd used every shady trick in the book to build his company. After not too long a time, they fired the president and went on a nationwide search for a new one. They enlisted a premier search agency to find their new president, and the agency had managed to discover Ed. Ed had built up a successful real estate business in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Midwest in the U.S., and sold it to the most successful of the large real estate franchising companies. As you'll soon see, in addition to the money he got for selling the business, he got some of the best advice he ever received. Shortly after he sold his business, Ed started having trouble selling real estate. It was a real problem for Ed, not only for his ego, but also because a large part of his profit in the sale of his business was based upon a complicated formula of how much new business he was able to bring in for the first 3 years after the sale. Gil, the chairman of the real estate franchising business, flew in to meet with Ed. It was certainly not a social call. Gil spent 3 full days with Ed, first reviewing all of his plans, and then attending sales meetings and working with Ed and individual salespeople as they tried to revive the business. I've got some other stories about stress, but trust me, no matter how much stress you think you've been under at any time of your life, it's nothing compared to what happened to Ed. He spent several 16 to 18-hour days of pure misery. Gil was not only relentless, he was obnoxious. He told Ed he couldn't believe how bad he was. He threatened to sue Ed and not only take away all the money he'd already given him for his business, but to add millions to the lawsuit for false representation. At the end of the long 3rd day, Gil said to Ed, "What's the most expensive restaurant in town?" "The dining room at the Ritz-Carlton," Ed replied immediately. "It's where I used to take all of my good clients to celebrate. My wife and I stayed there years ago on our honeymoon." "Make us a reservation for dinner tonight," Gil ordered. "Call your wife, tell her to join us there. I've got some things to say, and I want her to hear them as well." Ed did as he was told and warned his wife, who'd already heard the stories of what had been transpiring the last few days, to expect the worst. Ed and his wife met Gil at the Ritz-Carlton and held their breath, waiting for another tirade from Gil, but instead he was charming. He ordered champagne and caviar and told stories of how he'd built up his real estate franchising business. Then he paused and said, "But enough about me. That's not why I invited you here." Ed and his wife thought, boy, this was it. Now the axe will drop and we'll find out how much trouble we're really in. But instead, Gil said, "Ed, you build up one of the most successful real estate businesses in the country. That's why I bought it. In the process, I'm sure you faced some unbelievably tough situations. What you're facing now is just another tough situation. What happened to you is you forgot who you are. So I booked the presidential suite here for you and your wife at my expense. Treat it like a second honeymoon. There's only one thing I want you to promise me. Reminisce together about how you built your business. Remember the tough times and how you were able to get around them. I don't want to see you for another 2 days, but when I do, I want the old Ed back. It worked. Ed never forgot it. I've used the advice myself as I face tough situations, and it's always worked for me. I'll bet it works for you, too. Thanks for letting me spend some time with you and to share my stories. If I left you learning for more, send me an email at jrfall@yahoo.com and I'll send you some information about the Leadership Insight series, a collection of 5 seminars based upon my book, and then there were stories, lessons from a lifetime of leadership. The book is available on Amazon.com in print and electronic Kindle editions. One of the seminars, Leadership Myths and Musts, includes the stories behind the phrases, "You're trying to put your children through college, I'm trying to feed them," "Everyone goes home at night fulfilled," "You can't learn how to be taller," and the story I just told you about Ed, "You forgot who you are." The stories are interspersed with quotes from Dilbert, former President of the United States Bill Clinton, Mel Gibson as Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore in the movie We Were Soldiers, U.S. billionaire investor Warren Buffett, and former Secretary General of the United States Dag Hammarskjöld. The other seminars include What Can I Do? Leadership Lessons from Everyday Life, Leadership Lessons from Entrepreneurs, and The Pace of Leadership. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed the stories and will not only learn some of the lessons yourself, but pass them on to your colleagues, because knowledge is one of the few things that increases when it's shared.